hello everybody, good evening. Yeah, I do have a quick presentation for you. It's got 12 slides in it, so hopefully I can do those in 10 minutes, but there's an awful lot to share, and I hope that it'll be of inspiration for you and for the meal. So I'm Lucy Orta, and I'm a visual artist, and I work together with my partner, Jorge Orta. He's Argentinian and I'm English, but we're based in Paris. I guess we're stuck in Paris at the moment because I can't come to the UK. But I do have a post at the University of the Arts in London, and my post is a professor, and I'm chair of art and the environment. And so I champion projects that are linked to environmental issues, sustainability in general, social environmental issues, I would say. I cover like a broad spectrum of artistic engagement. And I guess the impetus behind our practice, the Studio Orta practice, is that it's engaging, participatory, and we try and look for methods and ways to allow these encounters and the community's voices to come through in the kinds of projects we're doing. I guess we have a very traditional arts training, both of us, both me and Jorge, and so we do make a lot of sculpture. So I was going to start with, I will start with, I guess, our first project, our first introduction to the theme of food. This is back in 1996, so it's a long way back, but it helps set, I guess, the context for why we're interested in exploring food. And then that will lead on to the meal. So actually what we need to focus on this evening. So hopefully I'll get it done in 10 minutes. Hope. Please, shout at me if it's going too long, or if it's too, if you need a break, basically. Okay, so I'll share my screen. I'm not used to working on Zoom, so yeah, here we go. And yeah, do let me know if it's being shared. And can I go full screen? Is that full screen? Great, perfect, thumbs up. Okay, so 1996, as I said, and yeah, this is a, well, you can see here, it's a gathering, a small gathering in Paris, in Les Halles. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to come into the center of Paris. This is the church, it's Saint Eustache Church. And this district here was the former market, what do you call that? A wholesale market for fruit and vegetables. So Les Halles, it was traditionally, before all of the wholesale market got sent out to the outskirts of Paris, this is where the food issue was at the heart of the Parisian population and the heart of eating in France. And I can't remember the date that it was sent out to the outskirts of Paris, but it was turned into an awful shopping centre called Les Halles, really terrible, and it's now been returned into a new shopping centre, even more horrible. But it is oh, sorry, they've got a huge storm starting outside in the road, and it was like an explosion. Sorry. So yeah, it's a really interesting context to set this project, which we called All in One Basket. So everybody's in the same basket, basically. And we were, as I explained, motivated by working on food issues at the time when the European market opened up, and produce from Southern Europe was being imported into France at a cheaper cost than the produce that could be produced by French farmers. And I don't know if you've got any vague recollections of that period, but there was tremendous, humongous protests in the streets, and particularly in southern France, where the farmers dumped all of their harvest onto the motorways in France. And it was mountains and mountains of peaches and apricots and tomatoes, you name it. It was all out on the motorways. And we were, of course, really shocked by that, because thinking of all the populations in need of being fed, and at the same time, the livelihoods of the farmers, and, the jeopardy of the making a living in the future because of the opening up of the European community, the opening up of the free trade borders. But we couldn't go and pick up the produce at the time, so we started gleaning. So we started collecting waste produce in the markets every week in Paris, or twice a week in Paris. You'll find markets in different districts. And at the end of the day, there's tons of produce thrown out onto the streets, either because it's too ripe, or whatever. And there's communities of people that go there to collect it. Could be people like us that are shocked, or gleaning communities, those that are obviously in need of collecting food, students. So it was a really interesting, I guess, reflective process for us to, understand a little bit what was happening to this waste, where it was going, and what we could do about it, knowing that there was all of that waste on the motorway in France. So we had this amazing opportunity to have this exhibition in the gallery, which is in the corner of that church there, the Saint Eustache Gallery, run by a wonderful priest, Per Benito, who also runs a soup kitchen there too. So it's a soup kitchen and a gallery, which is amazing. And we decided for the opening of our exhibition to stage this buffet. And we collaborated with an amazing pâtissier, chef, traiteur, delicatessen, who converted 300 kilos of the fruit and vegetable that we collected in the market, on the markets, basically on the floor of the markets, in the streets prior to that event. So here is Stoher, handing out the dishes. So that was a fantastic opportunity for us to share our frustration, with all of this waste, and then to generate conversations about food waste. And of course, we all know how far that discussion's gone on since those early days, 1996. This was before any legislation was put into place about, sell-by date produce and all of these. I've seen there's amazing apps that are available at the moment that you can log on to go and pick up the lettuce or the meal that's going to be thrown away. It's just absolutely tremendous what's moved on since then. But we kind of like, somehow in the back of our minds, we say we're kind of like pioneers in this food waste. These are some objects from our exhibition, which took place in the gallery. So you can see that we've recycled fruit crates. I don't know whether you have these in the UK, but they're really typical in France, and they're also dumped on the streets as well. These beautiful silkscreen printed wooden crates that we took apart and we reassembled them, and then they're photographs of our gleaning activities. So all of these mounds of produce, but not only, because we became fascinated with markets and started photographing produce everywhere we went and anything that was in abundance, and also to show this contrast between the the have and the have-nots. And then on the there's these little windows that pop up in front, so I can't see what I'm showing you. Here we go. There's the conservation unit, we called, which is that kind of trolley with the wheels on it and the baskets attached to it. In there are speakers and Walkmans. So I think you all remember Walkmans. Those of you that aren't are too old, maybe not the younger ones amongst you, the Walkmans there, that you could listen to the conversations that we had with gleaners on the markets. So all of those different populations that I mentioned that were picking up food. And so during the day, of course, we were able to distribute that, create conversations. We made all of these little tasters and jellies and things. They became kind of like additioned artworks in a way of like civilizing this waste, but, engaging people in discussion. How do I move on? Here we go. Here's some, in terms of like a methodology, methods we use, that was like, okay, what do we do? How do we react? So that was the first thing we did. And then we thought about it later. Okay, well, actually the problem here is that the waste is being thrown onto the streets and it's really dirty, and we need to process it very quickly because it's very ripe. So instead of it being thrown onto the streets, we handed out in our second, what became known as a Haughty recycling enterprise. In the second part of this project, we made these little bags and we handed them out to the market vendors. So instead of them throwing on the floor, they would put them in the bag, and then we made these trolleys. You can see like a shopping caddy and a sink, and there was hot plates and a freezer, so that we could automatically clean and process the food and distribute it right away before it became too ripe. And basically, like, and again, this process of recycling. And we're artists, and so we were thinking about, well, actually, maybe these can be initiatives that can be adopted by communities. And it was, the inspiration behind this project was to let, as many people engage, as many people as possible in this issue. And then again, the objects that we make are kind of very sculptural too, so that we put them in the gallery here in the Vienna Gallery in Secession. This is in the heart of Secession. And you can see that pulley structure with the bags on it. And actually that was overhanging the market, because the market was just underneath the gallery. So, I mean, it's also the reason for us setting up this exhibition here, so that we can have those conversations. And I guess what we really like to do is link the, let's say, the art world, the art field, with communities, so that this conversation going on between galleries and museums and the wider community all the time. So kind of like bridging these gaps, you know, between what is art and what it isn't, kind of thing. So yeah, that's it. Yeah, and that brings us on to meals, food. So, you know, what we found most interesting, I think, was there a slide with it? Yeah, you can see the tasting there. And what became, I guess, a focus was this eating together, because that was a way of generating conversations. So we started working on this project, which is 70 by 7, the meal, that we started working on in year 2000. So we started in 1996, so 4 years later. We moved on to how can we set up a project that will bring people together. And so 70 by 7 became a strategy whereby 7 people invite 7 who invite 7, etc. I mean, it's loosely in that, you know, it could be one person who invites another, but it was a way for us to kind of manage the potential of bringing people together. So I don't know how many, if you have a core group, or if, you know, members of you can also be ambassadors in a way where you can think about inviting others in this multiplication game. You know, you can take on that role of you know, reaching out to different communities in bringing people together. And this is what we did in this first meal. So the first meal was for 14 people, yeah. And we were quite strict in the beginning. It had to be in multiples of 7, but now it's not, we've gone beyond that. But so there were 14 people here, and we asked every one of those guests sitting around that table to invite 7 other guests to a second meal. So, and we couldn't seat them around the table because it was getting too big by then, but we had a buffet. And the 14 people were really strategically, I guess, chosen. So we had farmers, both from imported, who were selling imported produce on the markets, and farmers who were, you know, locally sourced, were actually, not farmers, sorry, market vendors that had locally sourced produce, and those that had were selling produce that had been imported. And then we had the local representatives from the mayor's office, we had journalists, chefs, you know, think carefully about who we want around the table so that this conversation can lead somewhere. I mean, this is its really early days. So that was our first meal. And then they're not in any order, but I have got some text here, I guess. Yeah, I should mention our inspiration, because I think that's really important too. We were really inspired by a Colombian priest called Padre Rafael Garcia. He passed away in 1990, but he used the meal. It was a kind of like it as a benefit, as a charity fundraiser. I mean, he conceived this project whereby he would ask people to pay for their place at a meal, and he selected, you know, VIP guests that had the money to do that. But the whole idea was that the money that was being paid for these meals, and I don't think it really mattered what they ate, but it was to help build a community. He wanted to build that community, and he ended up doing it. And you can look it up on the internet. So it's called El Minuto de Dios is the community, El Minuto de Dios. And it includes, it's a whole district in Bogota in Colombia, with schools, homes, gardens, a theatre, contemporary art museum. Well, you don't need that in Manchester, you've got a fantastic one, but you don't need small factories either, but he built factories, a university. It was absolutely, you know, fantastic, the results of that meal, that over the years and the dedication to that concept allowed him to do that. So we took that as a kind of like guiding line, that this meal should go on forever and ever. And in fact, the symbol 70 by 7 does mean forever ad infinitum. So that's the idea, that we should continue working on it. And only through this continuum, this idea of inviting more and more and more people, will we get, will we be able to, I guess, achieve change in some way. Yeah, and this is a meal in Philadelphia for 900 guests. It was absolutely tremendous, and it's like hugely diverse. I mean, I guess there's a core, there's a meeting point for this meal, but in this particular occasion, we had meals happening in different communities simultaneously, because quite often, particularly among disadvantaged communities, it's really difficult to travel, it's expensive to travel, etc. So, you know, we make sure that things happen simultaneously outside of like the core event. In this case, this is the Thomas Paine Plaza in Philadelphia in the US. And you can see there on the right, is that right? Yeah, on the right. I don't know if it's the left or right of your screen, but on the right, the plates that we designed, and I'll say a little bit about the plates in a minute, the Royal Limoge plates that are designed for each of the meals. I'll just move on quickly. Yeah, this is, what did I want to say about this slide? I guess, yeah, that 70 by 7 serves as a pretext to bring about encounters between guests who are invited to dine in these surprising installations. And I guess we as artists are just triggers in this process, and, you know, providing a kind of like a framework for it to happen. And then we also say that 70 by 7 should be it's an invisible artwork, because it takes the form of a ritual, a daily ritual. Of course, we're all eating, and it's mimicking this essential need to eat and unite. And by setting them in these urban locations, it's a space to reflect the need for spontaneous general assemblies, to concert, to reconcile, yeah, through an artwork that's active in the community. And I guess, you know, that it takes the form of a meal is also, it's, you know, much more participatory. It's not, you know, I know some people, some communities find it really difficult to go to a museum because there's that fear of not knowing or understanding what might be there. So, you know, by bringing art out into the community in the form of this meal, it's a way of sharing it as much as possible, sharing art. And that all the clues, the things that we design or make for that meal kind of, you know, are in a sense invisible. The plates are there. You can see the plates on the table, and they're inscribed with motifs and symbols, and they're intriguing objects. So again, it's about, you know, you can see a chap there picking up the plate to see, oh, where's it made, and, you know, why is it there, and the lady there on the bottom looking at it, you know, what's it all about. And it's, you can generate conversations through these objects. We call these relational objects that, you know, provoke a discussion or prompt, yeah, prompt, I guess, talking, prompt, you know, getting in conversation, and you're getting in conversation with a stranger. Yeah, this is one of our really, I guess, I've chosen a couple of examples of meals that have been like particularly just moving, just really emotional occasions. This was our first meal for 3,000 people in Dieu's. I mean, we thought big from the start. I mean, there was the one before that in the Kunststraum with 14 people, but right after that, we went right up to 3,000. And that took us a good 18 months to set up, and internet didn't exist at the time. So we say, you know, word of mouth, press, radio, and then this strategy 70 by 7, we had 7 ambassadors. Those ambassadors were associative groups. It could have been, you know, or the school, or the, you know, somebody in the hospital, community groups that then were able to, you know, reach out to their constituents to enable this meal to take place. So 3,000 people. That tablecloth was 1.5 kilometers long. And now what's that in miles? Oh, I didn't do my maths before. Long, really long, 1.5 kilometers. And so we printed that tablecloth by hand in our studio. It's a silkscreen printed tablecloth. And we made an edition of 1,500 plates, Limoge plates, and I'll show you the pictures of those in a bit. And the success of this meal was that we sold 750 plates on the day. It's absolutely tremendous, and 1,500 people turned up for the meal, which is just incredible. This is a small rural town in the northeast of France, with a, you know, hugely diverse population, lots of unemployment. There's a mine there which is closed down. It's an army base as well, so you can imagine all of this really diverse, really quite difficult to bring people together in this situation. A lot of immigrant populations too. So it was, I think, really successful. And example of the success was that people wanted to take away the plate at the end of the meal, and we were able to sell it at cost price. And Limoge is absolutely, I'll just show you quickly if I move on. Yeah, these are some of the Limoge plates here. It's just beautiful porcelain, and we're really lucky to be working with Limoge since 20 years. They're a manufacturer like Spode or Royal Dalton in the UK. Is there another one? Worcester, Royal Worcester. You know, these really old traditional craft industries that are in danger, of course, closing down. And I think in some cases they have even closed down, haven't they? Royal Worcester's been bought over by a Danish company. So, you know, how can we support these local industries? So that's part of also our, you know, ethos at Studio Orta as well. So, you know, those are some of the designs, and we've produced over 40 meals, produced or coordinated or triggered, I would say triggered, 40 meals and 70 limited editions of plates. Sometimes they're given away to the community if we've got enough funding to be able to do that. Sometimes they're sold at cost. It's like, you know, case by case scenario how this has worked out. And I'll just go back to this slide here in Peterborough, because this is really close to Jude's heart. Is she there? Is she here this evening? No. Okay. Well, Jude was, yeah, I guess instigator of this project here. This organisation is called Metal, and is there a Metal in Manchester? No, there's a Metal in Liverpool, isn't there? A community arts organisation, and they contacted us because they wanted to create a meal in the street just outside of their organisation, their building. And when I went on a site visit, I said, you don't want to do it in the street outside your building. You know, we've got this amazing cathedral square, and it's just as easy organising, you know, a huge meal as it is a small meal, because we've tried and tested it so many times before. So, you know, it did take us a good 2 years to make this meal happen for 500 people. It was the first time that Cathedral Square had been invested in this kind of event, and traditionally it was a market square too, so it was really important to kind of bring that, you know, the civic sense of, you know, being in that square and eating locally sourced food with you know, an amazing chef that went on to open kind of a Michelin restaurant afterwards as a result of this. It was just absolutely fantastic, the engagement that took place, and it was part of a festival actually, and funded by the Arts Council. I think they received an exceptional award from the Arts Council, so that the money had come through an arts grant to be able to support this. And we made those beautiful plates, not the ones that are on the image, but there may be a picture of them coming up to celebrate the harvest. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Yeah, there are some of the plates again. And yeah, just to finish, a visual artery spanning the streets, crisscrossing communities, bridging people together through the ritual of eating and sharing. I guess that's our motto, that this tablecloth can unroll and unfold in communities around the world, and bringing people together. And this meal is a project that one day we would like to realise for 5,000 people, more or less, we've calculated, but you know, I guess many more can. I don't know how many we can sit around the table, but the logistics of it, only the Tate could organise it, so we've got to lobby them. But it would be absolutely wonderful for this to happen. So I hope it's been an inspiration for you, and I'd love to, you know, answer any questions that you might have afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting and informative.
Did I stop sharing my screen? There we go.
Perfect. Has anyone got any questions you'd like to ask? I know there's one from Maggie. Do you want me to ask it for you, Maggie? And from Tristram as well?
Fire away. Is it in the chat?
Sorry, I couldn't find my button there. Yeah, I've put one in the chat, but as a golden oldie, I'm always interested in the toilet facilities, whether you're dining in or out.
Very important question. That's to be considered right from the start. Absolutely. And yeah, we put that in your budget, because you need to hire porta cabins, or if there aren't facilities in the neighbourhood to be able to use loos. But yeah, depending on the size of it, you'll need a lot of loos and a lot of toilet paper. but budget it in, unless you can work with an organization that you can have access to. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how you're thinking of organizing your meals, whether you're going to do them in your communities or whether there's one big meal. Maybe you'll talk about that a bit later on, but certainly, think about that right from the start. That's like so important for the comfort.
My other query was how you stopped people who already knew one another all sitting en masse, how you distributed them.
That's we've tried all kinds of techniques, methods, if you like. One is giving coloured bracelets or ribbons to people as they turn up, and then you have to either sit at a table with that colour or find that colour on a table somewhere, so that you end up sitting next to somebody you don't know. Or if it's a smaller meal and you can manage it, is to get people to move places during the meal. So set aside a time, if you've got a kind of like a chairperson that's there and who's got a loud enough voice or a megaphone that can get people moving around. It's really, really difficult, that question. It's one of the hardest things, because I know what it's like, you tend to like, you have a really nice person that you're sitting next to, and then somebody like jumps in and says, all right, okay, everybody, you've got to change sheets. But I mean, getting over that fear of doing it is fantastic, because it does generate really interesting conversations. But yeah, I know how difficult it is. And yeah. Another one we had was ping pong balls. Somebody inscribed numbers onto ping pong balls, and I think we picked them out of the hat, and you just had to sit on the number on that table. So you make it as democratic as possible, so people are not fighting. Actually, she's got a red band, so I want the same as her, kind of thing. No, let's pull it out of a hat. Yeah.
I think we've got a question from Steve as well.
Yeah, Tristram was. Have you got a question before me?
You go first, Steve.
Thank you. I was just curious. I mean, it's amazing, that really inspiring, beautiful artwork. Those plates are gorgeous. I was just wondering if you used any other art forms as well, you know, dance, poetry, anything like that.
In the Peterborough meal, it was wonderful because the Arts Council supported 10 other artists to work alongside Studio Orta. So in a sense, we were mentoring the artists through their process, and we chose artists that came from different fields, different disciplines. So there was a theatre director, there was actually a milliner, there was performance artists, graphic artists, poets. So it meant that there were different formats created for the Harvest Festival. I mean, it ended up becoming a festival where each of those interventions, each of those interactions they had their own space in amongst the harvest festivities. So yeah, that was really, I think it was one of our most, I guess, successful meals in that sense, because we had participation from other disciplines which are not our speciality. There was a performance, there was a Harvest Festival performance with costume and stuff. It was just absolutely tremendous. And then each one of those artists worked with a different community group. So for example, the milliner, she's a specialist in straw weaving, and she ran workshops and classes to learn how to make straw dollies, those kind of dolls, and also napkin rings. So the community were able to make 500 napkin rings, beautifully hand woven straw napkin rings. They were just like, these kind of like really special little details came about because of the artists proposing projects alongside it. Yeah. And I guess that's where we say that kind of like we're enablers or triggers, things should happen naturally. Yeah. And I guess, work out who's got which competencies, so that you can pry them for.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tristram. Your turn.
Oh, Lucy, well, my first question is, how come after all these years you and I have never done a feast together? Because we've done the same stuff basically all over the world. I can't understand how we have never collaborated. Anyway, Lucy.
Yeah, because I Googled you and I thought, well, that's the man. I should have been working with him right from the beginning.
But did the use of food waste, the use of recovered food, which is where you started, as you said, did you carry on using food waste? And if not, what was the kind of emphasis of the ingredients? Was it locality, or how did you choose those? How do you continue to tell your story through the actual ingredients? Because I imagine
absolutely, yes. In that the first meal that I showed you in, it was a Kunstram in Innsbruck in Austria. That the first meal was with waste produce, and the second meal was with locally sourced. So it's when we started looking, more, I guess, holistically at the food system. Actually, these different areas, and it was, I guess, before the interest in locally sourced too. So that became, I guess, more of a focus over the years as the meals developed, and particularly as much as possible now it's locally sourced. And in Peterborough, the goal of the chef was to keep the food sourced within the postcode, the P postcode.
Brilliant. Do we have any more questions?
Maria.
Oh, Maria.
Thank you so much for that. It was amazing insights and learnings as well. You've shared your journey. I suppose one of the things that really strikes me as well is just that sense of the feast continuing forever, and that some of those artworks that get made can be an anchor point potentially for future feasting that might happen. So if there's a beautiful table runner that gets made, then maybe this is brought out again when another feast happens. And I wondered if you could say a little bit just about that and how that's worked, because I have a sense that there is always that onward eye in your work with the communities, even if you're not physically present in the same way.
Yes, so the tablecloths, as much as possible, we'll try and make a new edition of plates for the meal as much as possible. And if it's not possible, then we always keep a set of plates back in our archive that can be used for new meals. So there's always, if you don't have them, then we've got some in stock kind of thing. And then the same with the table runner too. And I mean, we've also organised, because organised is the wrong word, isn't it? It's like kind of triggered picnic meals as well. So we've made picnic tablecloths, and those have been really large scale. I mean, thousands of people. So we've been able to inkjet print like Tyvek kind of fabric, really at a very low cost. And so there's all kinds of, we have all kinds of artworks, I guess, in our archive that have been left over if they haven't been taken or distributed to the community after the meal. So yeah, there's always the possibility to do it. And I think in Peterborough, it was really beautiful that the metal organisation kept back a set of the plates and the table runner, and had it as a loan so that it could be loaned out for communities or for people in their homes, because it was for 14 people. That you could actually have access to that if you weren't present at the meal. You could continue using it beyond that, and the idea being that you would, in a sense, invite people that you didn't know, or to somehow engage in a new conversation or a discussion that you might want to bring to the fore. So yeah, there's all kinds of ways that it can happen beyond the initial event.
Do you have any more questions for Lucy?
I've seen a question from Weather Really Stormy. What indoor venues did you make use of, and what arrangements did you, liquid refreshments? Yeah, we talked about this in the context of Manchester, didn't we, Maria? That it will be a bit problematic having an outdoor meal, but it also depends on the time of the year. I mean, we have just prayed to the gods. Please don't let it rain, please don't let it rain. And it has never rained, I must say, in any of our outdoor meals, but we've just been extremely lucky. Indoor meals, if it is a bit problematic, then yes, we have to source venues that can accommodate the guests. And then it's about, well, the venue, how many people does it accommodate? And unfortunately, we have to plan for a meal for that set amount of guests. And that can be really non-inclusive, I could say, but there's ways to do that in terms of like a lottery and signing up and being engaged in activities leading up to it that kind of like assure a place at the meal. It's really sad when that happens, but in some cases it has to be done. But then, you know, there's a possibility that other meals can take place in other venues simultaneously. So it shouldn't be a barrier for, you know, okay, there's one venue, but maybe we can do it in our homes, or maybe we can carry on afterwards elsewhere. Yes, and the thing about liquid refreshments, how we find partners to help us with that each time. Yeah.
Sorry, what was that?
About liquid refreshments, yeah. Somebody
didn't
can
catch
help
your
us.
answer.
Oh, sorry, yeah, we've had partners, sponsors, collaborators help us with the liquid refreshments, yeah. In the very large scale, it could be like food trucks. We've had in Peterborough, it was a local producer of cordials, so then it was really easy to just put jugs of water on the table, and the cordial was a nice local sample. Anything else I can think of? Yeah.
Did your guests wear tags to identify themselves? You know, name tags?
Yeah, depended on the meal, but in Philadelphia there was, I mean, that was 900 people to manage. It was, I mean, the logistics of that were incredible, and we were helped by the Mural Arts Organization. So they're a community-based arts organization working on public art projects in Philadelphia in the US. And they had everybody's details before they turned up, and the guests had to arrive at a table and receive their bracelet, their colored bracelet. So all of the organization had been done prior to the guests arriving, so that it was a question of, you know, ticking off the name and giving them the pre-assigned colored badge. And that was also to make sure that different communities could mingle around the table as well. So it's not, you know, like the silo that you mentioned before, there's a danger of that happening. And so as much as possible to kind of disperse.
But with name tags, you're not forever, you don't have to remember the names. That's
No.
the main thing. You don't have to keep repeating the same question.
Yeah, then you have to have a little sticker or something, yeah. There's all kinds of ways to do that. But yeah, there's a lot of pre-planning that goes into it, and thinking about those little details.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. It was so interesting to see your approach through an artistic lens and around the waste food, and that it's been going on for at least 20 or 30 years. So that's really interesting to know as well. I think we're going to move to Tristram now, if that's okay, for you to do your presentation.
Sure. I wasn't going to use slides, actually. I just thought, well, if it's 10 minutes, I'll just spiel. And I'm kind of glad that I chose not to do that, because they all basically look like Lucy's. So just imagine all those pictures you've just seen on lots of different capital cities all around the world, with loads of people eating food. But the angle has been slightly different, and of course I describe myself more as a campaigner and activist, and although we have involved artists at various different points, it's been a very targeted campaign. And the campaign has been a strategic decision to focus on the environmental impact of food. Food is the single biggest negative impact that humans have on planet Earth. It's the biggest source of carbon dioxide emissions. It's the biggest cause of deforestation. It's the biggest, by far the biggest user of fresh water, the main cause of soil erosion. It's the main reason why we're in the middle of a mass species extinction event on planet Earth, essentially. It's how we use our land to grow food for humans and take all of the wild spaces away from the rest of nature. And it is a colossal problem, and within that problem there are many sub-problems. And I chose food waste as one of the really prime focuses of all of my campaign work, indeed probably the preeminent subject that I've focused on. And the reason for that is that it is a huge problem in and of itself. A third of the world's food is currently being wasted. This is completely bonkers in the context of both the environmental impact, but also that there's nearly 1 billion people on Earth who don't have enough food to eat. And this contradiction between waste on the one hand and want on the other is, it's a very large fracture, if you like, within our civilization. And my objective has been to shove my crowbars into that fracture and leverage it for all I'm worth. The point being to expose not just that problem in and of itself, but the core hypocrisy at the heart of the food system, which food waste is a mere symptom of. And that hypocrisy is essentially, well, it's summed up really by what I would call the dominant paradigm within the food system. The idea that we have a crisis looming, we have 9 or 10 billion people expected on planet Earth by 2050, and the Cargills and Monsantos of this world very explicitly are lobbying with the message that the solution to that problem is to double food production by 2050 in order to stave off famine. Now, that doubling of food production in the absence of sufficient environmental regulation globally to prevent the environmental burden doubling is, I think, well, it's the single biggest threat to long-term food security, because if we did double food production, we doubled the size of that problem, we would cook the planet, not food. And that really is, it's a very worrying situation that not only large companies of that ilk are saying that this is what we need to do. Even venerable institutions like the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations parrot this cry: 50, 60, 70, 100% increase in food production needed by 2050. Now, food waste is a very good way, not the only way, of disproving that our primary responsibility is to massively boost production come what may. And of course, I don't deny that there are some localities in the world where increasing production and particularly productivity is a very important part of the solution. But just green lighting the desecration of the Amazon rainforest and Southeast Asian rainforests in the name of increased food production, that is quite simply suicidal. So food waste campaigning has been about both solving this individual problem, but also pointing to that core problem at the heart of the food system. Now, how to bring the issue of food waste to a large public audience? I campaigned for many years. In fact, while Lucy was organising her first feast in 1996, I was rummaging in the bins around here in Sussex. I was going to my school kitchen and collecting the food waste from there, the bakery waste from my local village, all in the name of feeding my pigs, and selling the pork to my school friends' parents, and the chickens as well, and their eggs. But I quickly realized that most of the food that I was picking up was perfectly fit for human consumption, started eating it myself, went on to university, continued to feed out of supermarket bins. And by the time I left university, I was sufficiently peeved off with the situation that I started bringing journalists around the back of bins and cooking them meals. And that kicked off a big media storm around the issue of food waste, and particularly this act of freeganism, that somebody privileged like me can survive out of waste food. That's obviously, it says there's something truly badly wrong with the food system. And I eventually, my second book, my first book was on the history of vegetarianism. So meat consumption has been another big focus of my work. Excessive meat consumption in rich countries being another one of those key opportunities to reduce that problem, is both an environmental as well as a public health good that we also need to address. But my second book was on food waste, and in that book I compiled a global survey of the quantities and causes of food waste, and most particularly what the solutions to the problems, the many different food waste problems up and down the supply chain could be. But I knew that whilst, of course, I got loads of attention for this book, it really kicked off and elevated the global debate that Lucy started in 1996. The issue was one that I felt really had the capacity to grab the masses, and I mean the millions, as opposed to just the tens of thousands who were going to actually sit down and read 350 pages of densely argued text. And I knew from my work on a smaller scale, as Lucy had been showing already, that the best way of engaging people on the subject of food is through their stomachs. And I thought, well, why don't we organise a meal? And I thought big, like Lucy, and the idea was to feed 5,000 people in Trafalgar Square. And this is back in, when was that, 2009. And of course, the Mayor of London said, no, you must be crazy, go home and think of something else. My now dear friend and then ally, Rosie Boycott, managed 5 weeks prior to the date I had set for this event to turn that no into a yes. So I had 5 weeks to organise a meal for 5,000 people, entirely made out of food that would otherwise be wasted. My first job was to go and find that food. I calculated 750 kilos of vegetables to feed that many people. I was donated 13 tons of fresh fruit and vegetables by all the farmers that I'd been speaking to as part of my research on food waste. They wanted this story to be told. They wanted the story to be told about the ugly fruits and vegetables that were being wasted on farms up and down the country, around the world, in fact, because the supermarkets were laying down ridiculous cosmetic standards on the fruits and vegetables. They wanted to help that. The surplus food beyond what I needed for the meal, we gave a lot of it away, a grocery giveaway to show people the vegetables themselves, and also gave the rest to FareShare and the other food redistribution charities in London who made it just part of their regular meal package. And that was a way of opening the door for those organisations who had previously not explored the opportunities of on-farm waste, the fresh produce on farms, as opposed to relying on factories and supermarkets to donate their food, which had led to actually a massive, disproportionately high percentage of junk food essentially in their offering. And this was a way of getting more fresh fruit and vegetables on an ongoing basis. And so kicking off that event opened that door for a more systemic approach to recovering that food. But the event itself, 12 days before the meal, I finally managed to find somebody who was capable of cooking this much food. His name was Para. He was cooking several hundred meals a day and feeding people on the streets of London with it. But he had the biggest pots in Europe. And he said, yeah, sure, Tristram, I'll cook 5,000 meals, that'll fit in one pot. Do you want something else as well? And I couldn't quite believe that a man of so few words would actually do what he said. He did. We sent up a whole bunch of volunteers. We sent up all the vegetables. They all had good fun chopping through the day, through the night. He was up at 4 in the morning, cooked up the food. We brought it to Trafalgar Square, set up our curry tent and our grocery giveaway. We set up bicycles to make cycle-powered smoothies with a blender attached to the chain. I'd invited all of the organisations that I thought either were working on recovering food or educating people about food waste, or who weren't, but I thought who ought to. So environmental organisations, consumer rights organisations, the Waste and Resources Action Programme, obviously. Friends of the Earth became partners, ActionAid development organisations who had things to say about the poor on the other side of the world who were suffering as a result of the waste in our part of the world. And, the media coverage for this first Feeding the 5,000 was colossal. I spent the morning, on the Today programme, the BBC Breakfast, Al Jazeera were there, the World Service, it was great, lots and lots of media coverage. But I literally had no idea if anyone was going to come to this event. It was a free for all. We didn't sell tickets. We just said free food, all from recovered food. We're going to make a point. And got all the chefs that I knew. Thomasina Myers came down on the stage to do food demonstrations about what people should do at home. Got all the punters to pack up fruit and vegetables for the charities that were, giving it out to people who really needed it. And it was only half an hour into the event. I'd been doing all these media interviews. By the way, it was snowing. You asked about weather. Someone asked about weather. It was snowing. It was December in central London. The Bishop of London had decided to walk from St Paul's to the event to give his little sermon. And of course, Feeding the 5,000, I should just say, of course, is a kind of, I'm a secular person. I'm not a religious person, but it's a pointer to Jesus's miracle of that name, where he fed 5,000 people in the wilderness. The bit that's less well known is that after the feast, of course, he says to his disciples, gather up the fragments, let nothing be wasted. And it's the fact that those fragments left over after the feast are more in quantity than the few loaves and fishes that he started with. That's the real miracle. And the point was, well, look, if you want to feed 5,000 people now, you just need to go and look around the back of supermarkets. You can easily feed 5,000 people. We fed 5, 6, 7, sometimes even 8,000 people in all these events that we did, all using 100% food that would have been wasted. And you don't have to be a miracle worker anymore. I mean, it's just tragic that that is the case. So that was kind of the point of that. Anyway, Bishop of London had to walk through a snowstorm to the event. And anyway, so I was kind of worried that no one was going to turn up and eat all of this food in the snowstorm. And I remember that moment, and I looked over the balcony in Trafalgar Square, and there was this huge queue of people all around Trafalgar Square, and it was they were walking through the snow and coming out of the curry tent, and they were saying all the right things. They were like, wow, this is delicious. Why would anyone waste this? And then you'd see people at the groceries giveaway and go, what, that's not a wonky carrot, that looks like any other carrot. It's like, yes, exactly. And it was festive and fun. We had the kids, we got School Food Matters to bring a truckload of kids. They were going around with all the food, giving it away. We got them on television with the ministers saying, you know, why is this food going to waste? Why aren't you doing something about it? And it was just amazing. It was a wonderful event. And that was supposed to be it. That was all I planned for. But the impact was, you know, colossal. The fallout after that event, the supermarkets basically threatened to cancel their arrangements with anyone who had supplied us with fruit and vegetables. One of the big suppliers, to their credit, faced them down and said, look, you know, Fairshare was there. Fairshare, one of the partners that you mentioned on your own website, go stuff yourself. You know, this is an important story. They backed down and started stocking wonky fruit and vegetables themselves on their supermarkets. The then Minister for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Hilary Benn, wrote to all the supermarkets saying, we want you to start donating your food instead of destroying it. Public awareness went from, well, there was a really good survey, actually. The SRA did a survey in 2009 before that event, in which people were invited to rank in order the issues that were important to them in going to restaurants, and food waste was 13th out of 13. A couple of years later, that survey was done again, and this is after the 2 Feeding the 5,000 events that we did in London, with all the mass media coverage and just rolling storm of interest in the issue, and food waste had become joint first most important issue. Since that date, household food waste has declined by more than 1/3 per capita in the UK. It's a colossal mass behaviour change achievement, of which it is very difficult to find mass behaviour change successes like that within the environmental movement, and this was really one of them. Food waste reduction has you know, really become a major issue, whereas before companies wanted to sweep it under the carpet. It's now impossible to be a big food company without a food waste strategy, and we've seen increasingly ambitious national legislation to tackle food waste, both in the UK and France, famously in the USA, and of course now we have the Sustainable Development Goal for the Geeks 12.3 to halve food waste by 2030. This is a target I put forward in my book without really any kind of belief that it would happen, and I'm now a UN champion of that goal. And you know, every country in the world has signed up to it, and many of the companies that I have spent many years campaigning against are now champions of reducing food waste. So there's been a massive change, and all the volunteers that I'd got together, we didn't have any money for that event, nothing. I mean, absolutely zero budget. It was all done on grassroots energy, and everyone said, "Look, Tristram, let's not stop there. Let's keep this going. It's cool." And sure enough, we started to get invited by countries all over the world to come and replicate what we'd essentially fallen upon, which is a strategy for launching a broad-based national movement against food waste, including all potential partners. And that's how it took over my life. And once Feeding the 5,000 had got its you know, its wind in its sails, we did it in around 50 cities around the world. We started to come up with lots of other initiatives. Lucy mentioned gleaning, or le glanage, and we set up the UK and European gleaning network to go around farms collecting produce to give to charities that would otherwise be wasted. When we did Feeding the 5,000 in Paris, which was in the pouring rain, by the way, you've been a lot luckier than me, absolutely pouring rain, we teamed up with a little group called Disco Soup, who at the time were just doing little feasts. They were getting their food from the Rungis, the warehouse, the wholesale market that is now, as Lucy said, outside town. And we got 2,000 Parisians in the rain dancing whilst prepping all of the fruits and vegetables that we had saved, doing a disco soup. We had celebrities there. It was mega. And within 6 months, there were 65 towns and cities around France, all with their own disco soup team, organising these events on a regular basis. It then went global. We took Disco Soup with all of the Feeding the 5000s we did. There have now been thousands and thousands of Disco Soup events in every part of the world, as a fun way of bringing people together, prep the food together, go out and give the food away for free, and just make it about kind of salvaging food, but also the systemic critique of the system. So we had a lot of fun doing that. We brought pigs into Trafalgar Square after the second Feeding the 5000 to make the point that any food that can't be eaten by humans should be at least eaten by livestock. So we had wonky apples that we were pressing and getting people to drink the apple juice, and then the apple pulp, people would come and feed it to the pigs as part of the engagement program. So that was all, it was all great fun. I also came up with another format more recently called the Bonobo Feast, which I've been doing now for several years. And this points to, well, I'll take a step back a little bit and then I'll finish. There's this beautiful word in the English language, companion. It's my favorite word. And its etymology is well, com is Latin for with, and pan is the Latin for bread. And a companion is somebody you share food with. And this word pops up in languages all over the Indo-European language group. Of course, in French, copain means friend with bread, compañero in Spanish and Portuguese. In Greek, it's slightly different, syntrophos, but it means the same thing, with food. Partner is somebody you eat food with. And indeed, the sharing of food to build friendship is a universal human behavior. It is universally practiced. There is not a civilization on earth that I'm aware of. I found this on the web for the sharing of food. That's Siri answering my non-existent. I put that on just so it tells me the time. Am I going over time? I'll wrap up in a second anyway. So the sharing of food is a universal practice. It's actually universal amongst all the great apes to a greater or lesser extent, and to the greatest extent in our closest animal relative, the bonobos, the pygmy chimpanzees. When they have surplus food, they will go out and proactively share that food with other bonobos. And interestingly, they will select a stranger over and above a friend to share that food with. Essentially what they're doing is turning surplus food into social capital to make new friends. And wouldn't it be nice, alongside all the environmental benefit, think of all the friends we could make if, instead of throwing away the 1.3 billion tons of food that humans waste every year, we instead found ways of sharing that with our neighbors, but also our geopolitical allies and friends. To not waste food on this scale is a huge opportunity. And that brings me to this, the Bonobo Feast is a kind of a feasting reflection of that principle, where the one rule is that you're not allowed to feed yourself. You have to go and feed other people with the food. In the context of a pandemic, obviously the rules of that game need to be changed. But in a way, it speaks even more strongly to me now, this principle of companionship. I've really missed sharing food with people. And I feel like it's kind of accentuated what a deep desire it is to come around a meal together and build that principle of companionship. To the extent that I've pretty much decided that all of my work up to this point, I don't have a spiritual practice. I don't do meditation or yoga, but I think companionship is a kind of spiritual practice. I think it is a way in which we can draw people together, both in a kind of literal way around a meal, but also in a more cosmic way in terms of how we run our food system, how we run our system as a whole, using the lens of good companionship. We should not leave anyone out of the feast. That stigma is a very powerful stigma, to be left out. We should include everyone in it. We should be in good companionship with the earth. And we should think about this both in our domestic and local and community sphere, but in our global companionship as well. And I think through that lens, we can turn the food system from our biggest problem into our most powerful tool to undo these problems. We actually know how to do farming in a way that puts carbon back into the soils instead of depleting it, replenishes aquifers instead of over extracting water, creates habitat rather than destroys it. And creates, a sustainable, healthy food system for all. And I truly believe in the power of feasting, of projecting in a kind of parable, a lived parable, the story we're trying to tell about what we need to do with our food system to fix it. I think a feast is a unique opportunity to inspire, to lead, and to engage people in the practical things that everyone can do, and then the more political solutions that we need to deploy to save planet Earth and create a food justice for all of those billions of people that are expected on planet Earth.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask?
I noticed that a lot of the questions before were practical stuff. I am so happy one gets lost in the big picture, but there's nothing like calculating how many carrots you have to chop to feed 5,000 people. It's like you can get really excited by kind of quantities and logistics. It's so important.
You've put me out of a job, Tristram, so I'm not going to organise my meal for 5,000 anymore.
The answer is we should do it together. I mean, come on, like that would be so much easier. I've always wanted to collaborate more with artists than we have done. And it's such an important, you know, the way in which your art history and my kind of environmental campaigning has so dovetailed. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah.
We should do something together.
Yeah.
So I think we had a question from Nadim and one from Maggie. Are you guys okay to ask questions?
Shall I go first?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks. Well, really inspiring listening both of you. I'm actually very much inspired. Just a quick question with Tristan. When you were preparing meal for those 5,000 people in Trafalgar Square, did you at any time feel scared that what if not enough people turn up and all this prepared food is access? What am I going to do with it?
Every time. Every feeding the 5,000, and Trafalgar Square, it all went very, very quickly. We had an incredibly, I spent a lot of time designing the queuing system so that we could serve. I calculated we needed to serve a meal every 1.5 seconds, which meant that at peak time it had to be every second, and you know that was a major kind of challenge. In Trafalgar Square, it's never been a problem. We've always managed to get that number of people just flock and it goes. And it's been such a diverse audience as well. You know, homeless people standing next to a minister, standing next to a mum with her 3 kids. You know, all of that's been so important. But there have been cities where it has been a struggle. Either we've had a location that hasn't been as easy to access or not as good footfall, and we've always relied on local partners. Everywhere we've gone, we haven't tried to kind of create our own organisation. We've gone and worked with the existing organisations and done our best through steering groups to target both the story, tell the story, the local story. We would completely depend on people if it's about inner city. We did it in Manchester years ago, and there the story was very much about poverty, about food poverty in part of some of the neighbourhoods in Manchester, and you know you'd get towards the end of your event, you go, oh, bloody hell, there's still another 1,000 meals to serve, and it was literally quite often, not often, on a few occasions, I remember it being a slog. You know, basically me standing on the street going, "Come and get some food," go and eat it for hours with a lot of effort. And that is obviously a major consideration. You really need to work on choosing your location, having a realistic promotional plan to get the people to that feast. Or you do what Lucy did, you do a ticketed event and then you know how many people are coming. But I think you're always going to have that problem. You just have to have the grit to ensure. I mean, it was like, no way. But the other thing is if you can have a kind of a plan B. So if there's a soup kitchen that says, yeah, if you need to, you can. I think we've rarely have ever done that, but it's good to have a contingency plan for some of that food. If you can chill it and give it to somebody the next day or whatever. But yeah, it's a major consideration.
It's Maggie here. My question was about doggy bags. It's one of my favourites because the first time I really came across the idea of a doggy bag was in the early 70s in Switzerland, where my personnel managers considered it quite normal to ask for a doggy bag. I think it took about 20 years before it actually reached the UK and was acceptable. So do you encourage your diners to bring something with them, or do you just collect it all later?
Giveaway. We did for the grocery giveaway, but no, our objective in terms of the hot food that we prepared was to serve everyone the food, and that's, I think we achieved that every single time. I don't remember an occasion where we didn't manage to do that.
How much of a mixture of cold and hot did you do then?
Oh, that really varied. I mean, you know, we really went with, I mean, but the main meal we tried to do every time was a hot, full meal. So anyone coming felt they'd got a proper feed. But we had, you know, smoothies, for example, salads, fruit salads. There's no single answer to that question. Because, you know, across the many events we've done around the world, everyone has been different, but the basic premise was a hot meal.
Mm-hmm. Maria has a question.
So my question is linked actually for both Lucy and Tristram. We want to bring feasting into the heart of the festival when it happens at home in Manchester as well. And we've talked about bread and the act of breaking bread together and bringing that into this sense of people breaking bread with somebody they've not spoken to ever before, and wanting to kind of bring that into the practice of the festival in different ways as part of our festival days at home, and also thinking about that within feasting. And I wondered if Lucy and Tristram, you can talk a little bit about any kind of rituals like that in the meal that help to set up that conversation, the start of a conversation, or any kind of provocations that might be part of that breaking bread together and starting a conversation, and how you've played around that. Lucy.
Yeah, bread was very central to the meal in Peterborough, and as part of the engagement program, the 18 months prior to the actual meal taking place, the chef kick-started bread making workshops, which were then rolled out in different communities so that bread making could be learnt if people didn't know how to make it, or made communally together. And the idea was that that bread could also be then cooked for the meal for the 500, and that also we were very interested in just exactly what you've said, Tristan, and this idea of the companion breaking bread, that the bread would be the legacy of the engagement that had taken place and that meal. So we invited on the day all of the guests invited to the meal in Cathedral Square, and other people that were didn't have a place at the table. I must say that just going back to your the question about empty spaces at the table, we've had those too, but that's even more fun because that means other people can get involved. So yeah, we invited people to bring bread to an offering table. So there was a central layout. If you want, I can go back to those images later. But the layout in the Cathedral Square was the sets of table communing around the offering table, and onto which members of the community could place their loaf of bread that they had baked on top of the bread that was being provided for around the meal. And actually we took those loaves of bread and cast them into aluminium, and I didn't show you that slide, but that was kind of the legacy of the meal, that then we took on exhibitions as a result of that meal taking place. And that is the Peterborough Sculpture, if you like, of these, you know, loaves of bread, these 500 loaves of bread that are reminders of that event, but of that communing, that companionship. And also we looked at those in terms of their sculptural element, because making bread is an act of creating, an act of sculpting a form in this sense, something that we can eat. But we were very much interested in this craft, the crafting of making that shape. And you can see that specifically when they're cast into aluminium, it becomes an object, a beautiful object that's crafted by hand. Crafted through that fermentation process too. So that was the bread. And what else did I want to say about bread? I can't remember. Was there something else to your question, Maria?
I wondered about provocations, I suppose, or questions.
Yeah, because one of the artists, that's going back to one of the artists that was involved in creating an artwork, a performative artwork for the meal. The same artist who was the milliner, Eloise, she, at the same time that she was teaching straw plaiting, she wanted to move away from millinery and begin an artistic practice. So she used Peterborough as a test ground for her practice. And she created a number of artifacts. I think there were 5 gold artifacts that she had sourced from the museum in Peterborough, that were the relics, that were the artifacts from an archaeological dig of when the cathedral square had been a marketplace. So they were the objects, the remains of the market activity in Cathedral Square that were in the museum as artifacts. And she cast those into gold and inserted those gold, solid gold objects into the bread. And so there were 5 loaves amongst these 500 people that had these artifacts in. And everybody knew that, and nobody knew who was going to be the lucky winner of this just beautiful gold object that was in there. And she'd also inserted provocations in the bread so that when you broke it, a question popped out to pose to your neighbor. So yeah, there was lots of stories around bread, and certainly continue with that in the meals to come.
Thank you. Tristram, I don't know if there's anything, again, in terms of that ritual that comes to mind from the work that you've been doing.
Yes and no. I mean, the Bonobo Feast is very ritualized and had lots of ways of taking the kind of the step of feeding other people a bit further. Well, one of the, I mean, this is perhaps not an immediate answer to your question, but one of the things we did always focus on is again, on the food waste issue. Bread is one of the most wasted products, and we did lots of demos about how people could use and make the most of the bread that they had, making breadcrumbs and croutons. It wasn't until 2015 that I learned from Sebastian Morven, the Brussels Beer Project brewer, that you can also make beer out of old bread, and that is what created the concept of what became toast ale, the making of beer out of bread. It's liquid companionship. This is how I know Paul. He's on the board, former chair of Toast Ale, this company that we created, and has now brewed beer out of bread in several different countries, and is now, well into on its way to its 3rd millionth slice of bread being brewed into beer. And there's no better way to drink the spirit of companionship than in a bottle of toast ale. That's really what we're trying to do in the company, is bring everyone into this practice of companionship through this universally, widely practiced drinking together, cheers kind of spirit of companionship. Indeed, we've got a project coming out in tandem with COP26 that I think at last, I've been wanting to get the bilingual pun by companion into our comms and since the beginning of feedback, and everyone's always knocked it back because it's too abstract. And I think at last for COP26 we're going to create the companion project which will tell this story. Yeah.
Thank you. Now I'm on tenterhooks. And back to you, Rachel.
I just have one question too. It's really interesting to hear you both speak about your work and the similarities in why you started doing it, the passion for waste food and gleaning. Why do you differentiate between Lucy being an artist and Tristram being a campaigner? Because there's quite a lot of similarities in what you do. Where do you think the distinction is?
Yes, I think I struggle to point to a distinction, really. I think it's just about, well, I don't know, Lucy may have a different view. I think it's self-description and how you're framing it. I also think that I suppose I have been very focused on the follow-up. So the event is never just for the purposes of holding an event. It has always been to catalyze. It's part of a theory of change. You create a public outcry, you amplify it through the media. Getting all of those headlines and screen time is not just a piece of fun. That directly translates into being invited to meetings with the CEOs and presidents of all the big food companies. It directly translates into getting access to governments at the highest level, who have suddenly got a media storm on their hands and want to satisfy their customers or citizens, their voters, with answers to that problem. And that is when you get the big companies agreeing to make strategic changes to their companies, which previously no amount of banging on their door telling them how dreadful they were would have got anywhere near doing. That is when governments, so after the Paris feeding the 5,000, I had invitations from McCain, Carrefour, Metro Group. These are the biggest food companies in the country, or some of the biggest food companies in the world. And I had the Agri-Food Minister, Guillaume Gouraud, saying, right, okay, we're going to do this national pact against food waste in France. We want to write a piece of legislation. Will you help with all your experience about how we can refine this legislation? How can we do it best? And that's how you change law. That's how you change business practice. That's how you change civilization. And I suppose, of course, you know, Lucy has clearly had impact and had these ripples. I guess from a professional point of view, I've always had to kind of theorize, objective, you know, measure, argue, and that's been the kind of structure. I'd be interested to hear whether Lucy's process is the same or different from that.
Yes and no. I guess we don't consider ourselves as campaigners or activists, more, I guess, enablers. So, you know, providing a framework for others to participate and create. And yeah, food is, of course, pretext. And then those, it can be a discussion about waste food or about local sourcing or about all the things that Tristram's talked about. But I think it's enabling communities to come together, and that's why I think where it would be useful for I guess for the next steps of our practice is to think that exactly of what you're saying, Tristan, about what you're saying is that, you know, how do you evaluate it and how do you understand the impact and take it to a next level? But this, I guess as artists, you know, we don't know, we don't have the tools to do that. And that's where, you know, Tristram, somebody like, you know, activism and campaigning does, you know, we know how to make objects and sculptures and the beautiful plates and produce those and the table runners and, you know, galvanize the artists to create performances and theatre pieces and, you know, speak different languages, different visual languages, different artistic and creative languages, but we don't necessarily have those campaigning and activist tools. Yeah, we haven't. That's not our skill, right? Yeah. So how, you know, I guess, how do we come together? Because that's the most important thing, isn't it? Is to, you know, is to glean from each other's skill sets in order to amplify these messages.
Thank you. That was so interesting.
I just want to put my kids to bed in 1 minute, so
cool. Thanks. Kinjaro, I think you had a question a while ago. I'm sorry, I've just seen it. Would you like to ask it still? Are you there, Kinjaro? Would you like to ask a question?
Is this something in the text or in the chat?
Yeah, it was for Lucy. thank you so much for your time, Tristram. I really appreciate you coming tonight, and it's really interesting to hear what you've been doing with the feeding of the 5,000.
I'm inspired by what you're planning, and wish you all the best. And I think, having spoken a little bit to Maria, it really sounds like you have some fantastic things planned, and very, very happy to have been part of it. I think you might be able to hear the sounds off. I've got to go.
Thank you so much for joining us, Tristram. So appreciated. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah.
Kinjiro, if you did want to ask Lucy your question, there's time, I think. No. Would everyone like a quick 5 minutes break before we go to our next speaker? Yeah, should we meet back here at 7:35?
If you like, I was just going to show you the bread, some of the cast bread, just to show you.
Fantastic.
I don't know whether I can show you different slides, but can you see that?
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I mean, those objects are just so beautiful. And you can see all kinds of different shapes of bread. So depending on, your culture of making bread, they all come together as little bread rolls, as chapatis, as plats. There's all kinds of breads. So, and they're just so beautiful. I mean, we're inspired by shape and sculpture. You can see.
It's a real oasis of bread there. It's beautiful.
Thank
beautiful.
you. So see you all in 5 minutes. The main person whose community puts on feasts quite a lot, and for them the idea of hosting a feast wasn't a big issue. So I wanted Nadim to come and talk about the work his community has done around feasting and to learn about that.
Right. Okay, thank you. Just before I say kind of give you an introduction, I just wanted to say, Ella, I'm sorry I got your email very late, so I couldn't respond in time. She asked me for some information. Now, I think I should give you some background of our community, which will make sense how we've ended up in a position where holding a feast for a couple of hundred people, 300-400 people is kind of okay for us. It's not a big deal. I feel very fortunate in that, thinking that we are in that position. As some of you might know, that I am from the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. The community was started by its founder, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, in a small town of India called Qadian. And the community's foundation was laid in 1889. And soon after that, this kitchen was also set up, where people could come and meet the founder of the community, because it was a remote village. People would come from far afield and stay in the village for few days to some months or whatever, and he organized this kitchen for them, so people could eat and stay with him until they feel that, okay, that's it, I've learned what I wanted to learn, and then they would go back. So this all started from there, and then he also started an annual gathering where people from the community would gather every year on at certain time of the year. At that time, in India, it was December. Every December, they would get together, and people from all over the country would come, stay in Qadian, and during that annual gathering, which was mainly for 3 days, there will be a big kitchen serving food to all of these people. So that tradition carried on, community grew, numbers grew, and I was not part of that. And then 1947, when India and Pakistan became two independent countries, the community's headquarters moved to Pakistan in a small kind of little town called Rabwa. And I was not in that annual gathering. Personally, I missed that one. I went as a child to the few before that, but the last gathering that happened, my parents or other people who attended that, they tell me there were 250,000 people in that gathering. So it's that small town would become an international temporary city in a way, where people from all over the world will come and stay. And in a way, the whole, and the residents of that town, all of them would become hosts. So that they would put people in their houses, you know, create extra space in their houses. But the main meal would be cooked in the big main kitchen, where it will be like portions for thousands and thousands of people would be prepared and served. Simple meal, but enough for nutrition and enough to deal with the cold again in December. And then the community headquarter has kind of moved to England since 1984. And in the beginning, it was small scale, but fast forward, at the moment that annual gathering is numbers are about anything between 25 to 30,000 people when it happens. Obviously, I'm talking about pre-COVID, and it happens around July, August time, south in oh God, somewhere in the countryside. I can't remember the name. If it comes to me, I'll tell you. But again, for 3 main days and a few days on either side of the main event, 3 meals a day are cooked and served to almost 25-30,000 people. So that's the national kind of experience. I'm not part of that, so but I know people who do that. I know the chefs. I know people who are like chopping the vegetable and everything. But personally, I don't become part of that. But locally in Manchester, where our mosque is Darul Aman in Hume, here we hold quite a number of events every year, and 1 or 2 events are kind of large scale, where we prepare food and serve for numbers around 400 people, 450 people. So that's the kind of experience and how it developed. The food part is always, for us at least, is kind of one of the events of the big event. So it's always part of something, part of an event, either celebration or a training program or an educational program, or but it's never been a main event. It's always been a part of the main event. So people would come to, let's say, celebrate Eid, for example. So they would come for the Eid prayers, and at the end, people would will sit together and eat food and, you know, enjoy that part as well. So that's how it has been for us. How we got okay with preparation and, you know, all that goes behind the scenes is that if I can give you a little bit of structure about the community, how the structure works. So there's main Ahmadiyya Muslim community, which was just Ahmadiyya Muslim community in the beginning. And then after many years, after the founder passed away, then his first successor, then his second successor, who happened to be his son as well, he kind of created a structure in the community to cater for the needs of different type of people, if that's the right word. So, for example, he created a branch which was women's, let's call it women's wing, if you call it. We call it auxiliary organizations. So there was one organization created just for women, where they could do anything, get together and work on different things or carry out any projects which were mainly related with women. There was a men's group, which is for men over the age of 40. Then there's another young men's group, which is from 15 to 40. So 15 to 40, then 40 and 40 plus. And then there's a children's group where boys from the age 7 to 15, and there was girls from age to 15. But on the women's side, there was just one big group. There was no like 15 to 40 and 40 to 40 plus. Obviously, for obvious reasons, you don't want to know a woman's age. So they were all kept in one big group. So when these groups were created, obviously they had to undertake different activities. Obviously, we are a faith organization, so most of the activities are around faith, learning about faith, learning about how to conduct yourself and, you know, learn about your religion and how to interact with the society in a bigger picture. So that's why we always say that serving the community is part of our faith, because that's what we learn while growing up in the community. So when I was like 7 years old, I started learning about basics. By the time I was 15, I had learned the basic stuff. And in those 7-8 years, the most of the time, the message that I heard most was two things. One was love for all, hatred for none. And two, you have to be useful for the community around you. And it doesn't matter if they are from the Ahmadiyya community or not, but people who are around you, you have to be beneficial for them. So as a child, this is what this was mostly all I heard about. Then from 15 onward, it becomes a bit more complex. You learn about basics about theology, what is the difference between my faith and other faiths, kind of thing. Not everyone becomes a scholar, but just basic enough so I can understand the faith that I'm following. Why am I following? I just don't want to follow a faith because I was born in this family or a family had this faith. Every individual Ahmadi is kind of tested in a way, put in that spot where we ask them, like, why are you an Ahmadi Muslim? Just tell us. Don't say that my parents are Ahmadi Muslim, but you have have your own reasons. And if you feel that this is not something that you like, then you're free to choose your own destination. So during that process, like I said, food has always been a part of another main event. So while we are learning all that, most of the time, I would say 90% of the events or activities we do are supplemented with food, and somebody is preparing that food. So I'll give you, go back to the example of the national event where, let's say, 25,000-30,000 people are waiting to be fed every day, 3 times a day. A child of 6, 7, 8 years old, or even younger sometime with his elder sibling, would be in the main marquee where all the speeches and activities are happening. They would be carrying bottles of water with glasses, distributing water to people. So that's their kind of first step, getting into the food area of the community and the service as well. So they will start from that little step, and then as they grow in age and as they become more confident, they, according to their choices, they would get into different departments, and one of them is food. So if somebody shows interest in food or being in the kitchen, you'll just appoint him as a runner, for example. Go and fetch that, go and do this, go and do this. So from small tasks to then finally becoming somebody who is a chef, for example, who has interest in cooking food. So in Manchester, we have like 5-6 different people who are keen in cooking. They like cooking. So we would give them chance to, okay, this time this event is happening, you're going to take responsibility. So let's try you out. And somebody else will kind of shadow them who is more experienced. Let's say, yeah, okay. For example, if they make a wrong estimate about how many carrots we need, they will just say, oh, what about things? So they will kind of mentor them. So that's how we kind of gain confidence. And not everyone becomes part of this food department. Like, I have no experience of cooking food or anything like that. But there are people who have interest in food, and believe me, there are a lot of people who take interest in food. They would kind of organically grow into that role, and you only have to show interest. That's all I would say. So that's how, over years in Manchester, we have kind of become self-sufficient in preparing food, in serving. So there are like boys groups, they would practice by serving food. For example, if we have table serving, then there are teams how to, they will agree, and somebody will tell them how we can get food to all of the tables at the same time, almost at the same time, because you don't want one table to be served and then the other one, and the first one is already finished. You don't want that to happen. So it's all by practice, at least in our community. But at the same time, what I have observed, there's a lot of common sense as well. For example, how much stuff we need to buy. what if we cooked something and more people turned up? Or what if we cooked as a food and not enough people turned up? What we do with excess food? So there are different tricks of the trade, I would call them. Let's say, for example, if there is less food and more people turned up, then there are ways that the chef would use, the tricks that chef would use to either do something with the food that is enough for everyone. For example, add water, simple, or do something else, or even put some extra chili in the curry. So if it's hotter than normal, people would eat less. I'm just giving you trade secrets here. So there are so many tricks that chefs would use. Or one of the open secret is that if there are more people than the food you have, you serve the dessert first, like send something sweet first, and it fills you up. You end up not eating a lot. But as there are some clever chefs, there are some clever feasters as well. I'm telling you that there are people who would look at the table and purposefully avoid sweet. They will know it's here because the chef is trying that we don't eat a lot. So I'm not going to eat. I'm going to eat more by avoiding the sweet. So it's all kind of fun thing going on as well. So when I was asked to talk about all this, I did not really know what to say because for me, it's kind of, we never think about it. We just grow with it. So I was talking to Rachel and I said, I think I'll just give a background to that. And then if there are any questions people wanted to ask me, which I can answer from our experience, I'll be happy to answer. I don't know. I've just mumbled around. I don't know if it made sense or not, but to me, it makes a lot of sense. All I can say is that once the coronavirus is over and we are again holding our events in the mosque, if anybody wants to come and see how chaotic it is and somehow everything gets organized, you're welcome to come and watch and be part of it. Prepare food with us. So if anybody has any question, I'm happy to answer.
Amazing. I think we've got a question from Elaine.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that your groups have got tricks of the trade for the groups that you work with. And what I'm interested in is, have you done anything with any other faith groups where it has interrupted your tricks of the trade? Because quite often, some of the battles I've had when you're working with other groups that are used to doing big meals is things like stopping them using plastic plates with little sections in, because when they want to do a big meal, we need plastic plates and we need plastic knives and forks, and trying to get them to change over to crockery and less waste and recycling can sometimes be not a battle, but it's just not what they're used to. So is there any examples you've got of that where people have to change what they're doing and it's a bit difficult maybe?
It's a very good point about wastage, actually, plastic wastage particularly. And we use a lot of plastic disposable crockery, but recent years we have started to avoid it and start like using good quality paper crockery instead. It's not ideal, but at the end of the day, if you're serving so many people, hundreds of people, it's difficult to organize that crockery, and it breaks as well, and it's difficult to keep it replenishing. And even if you chip a plate, you don't serve the food in that plastic plate or paper plate. You just use it, dispose it off. It's easy as well. So I would say we are guilty of creating that rubbish in a way, or wastage. But for us, it's something that we are always conscious about, and we try to use the materials that are recyclable, that kind of efforts we do. In terms of experiencing working with other groups, it doesn't happen very often. Actually, rarely happens. It's normally either we invite somebody and we do everything, or somebody invites us and they do their stuff. So having a collaboration, probably when this feast goes ahead, and if we are part of it, I think this will be the first experience, and I think it will be a great experience to try that as well, to work with different people.
Yeah, I think because some of the things I've been involved with are on a much, much, much smaller scale than what you're doing, Nadim. But it's really interesting when you start putting that different mixture of cultures and the different foods that people eat and how people prepare their food. I find that fascinating. I find it really and hilarious at the same time sometimes. I've got some lovely stories of Chinese people trying to make mashed potatoes with a Sikh person, and it just ended up being like almost like a custard because they'd mashed it too much because they didn't get mash, and I just thought they would. So just just like quite entertaining things like that, which is nice to record as well. But thank you, yes.
Is there any more questions from anyone? Yeah, I've got one about, have you ever done any work about the groups of how they source the food? So like the gleaning workshops that Lucy mentioned.
Yeah, actually, we don't actually, we haven't worked with such groups yet. And the main reason for that is that whenever we hold an event, I should mention here probably that we are a self-funding community. So anything we do, we fund it ourselves. So, and there are, we regularly pay donations to the community. So it goes in a big pot, like every single individual contributes into the community pot, internationally, I would say. And that pot gets spent on so many different things. So using groups like gleaning and stuff, it has never come into our attention, probably because we don't need to think about that. And also we rarely have worked, like I was responding to Elaine, because it's very rare that we work with other groups. I guess these things, these opportunities, I should say, come up when you're working with other groups outside and you're thinking of saving money as well. Our food is normally very simple, so it doesn't cost a lot anyway. And also at the scales that we work on, sometimes on big events, gleaning groups wouldn't be able to cater for that. And also, I think one of the reasons is that the menu generally for our events is kind of set already. We have kind of figured out what's the best food to serve for everyone, like vegetarian, non-vegetarian, all that, something that suits everyone. Of course, in the national event, there are foods prepared for everybody's own requirements. Like, for example, not every individual, but for example, people who have diabetes or vegetarians or non-vegetarian. So there are separate kitchens for that because it's a huge event. But even at the local level, the menu we choose is kind of serves the majority. So yeah, unfortunately, we've not really had an experience of working with gleaning, for example.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. Any more questions from anyone?
Oh yeah, I'll come in and ask Nadim a question. I was going to say I found it really interesting when I was asking you about the kind of organisation and how you managed to kind of give everyone a role, but also how you have the auxiliary groups. There's a lot of the kind of festivals about kind of being able to come together and talk about kind of different topics. Do you find having those kind of groups within one big group really helps with that kind of structure and facilitates conversation?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. So for example, I'll give you a small example again around food. So tomorrow we are inviting some friends to come to our mosque, and there are going to be about 15 of them. So me as the president of the local community, all of these auxiliary groups or organizations are kind of under me, as I am kind of the main president of the main community, and then all these auxiliaries also have their presidents, if you call it, but they all work under me. So for tomorrow's meal, I just had to call one person and say 15 to 18 people, this should be the menu around that kind of food, and this is the time they will be spending with us, and this is what we want to, this is the purpose of their visit. And that's it. I said that. Now that person contacted head of young people's group, also a couple of other people, and he contacted the chef, and everything is done. I've not even gone to the mosque, and I know he sent me a couple of text messages. I haven't read them, but I know that he's updated me that right now one of the hall where we're going to eat, all the tables are set, table line, runners are set, and we're going to run a 10 minutes video. It's all set. So he's probably sent me the update report. So all of this structure really helps to be organized. And within their own auxiliary organizations, they also have like mini structures in the same way. So it depends who is starting the conversation. So for example, if I'm starting the conversation, then normally the heads of those auxiliaries will take a lead and do stuff, make sure that things are done. If one of them is starting the conversation within their own organization, like let's say young people's organization, then head of the young people's organization will have the same structure underneath him. So it kind of helps us to be organized. I don't know if that was your question.
Yeah, no, definitely answers that.
It speaks to me of the need for like clear roles within, when you're trying to make something huge happen, actually having some clear roles within it. And when I think about, yeah.
There is nothing like clear roles in this world I've experienced, even though this sounds very clear, but we're all human beings, and this is all voluntary as well. This is all this is only based on the faith that we share. But yes, absolutely, you're right that at least it gives some good idea about what everybody is supposed to do.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Nadim. And thank you so much to Lucy and to Tristram and for everyone who's attended tonight. Our toolkit is online now. It has links to lots of things that have been spoken about today: gleaning, feeding the 5,000 toolkit. And then you've been given a lead each between either me, Maria, or Ella. So hopefully that can be your main contact for any issues you may be having with your feasts. And yeah, thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night. Take care.